Good evening. It's been one heck of a day in the story of Boris Johnson's government, and I'm going to start today's show slightly differently. There is no more formidable weapon in modern life, no greater gift than an open microphone. And with your permission, today I'm just going to use it. Some of you will be in the car wondering when those lights are going to change. Some will have just shuffled down some beans or fish fingers to the kids, and I can see you're about to surreptitiously finish what they haven't eaten. Some of you, jogging on this sick, sweaty evening, are listening on little earbuds. Some are watching on your computers, a beer lined up alongside. But I assume and I hope you're all interested in the Boris Johnson story. So, what tonight do you really need to know? First thing, obviously, you're not going to get a new Prime Minister anytime soon. Now, you might think that's frankly weird, since for weeks and months he's been telling us and the House of Commons no rules were broken in those parties, which didn't happen. And now today we have it in black and white. Not just that the rules were broken, but those who broke the rules at the parties knew it at the time. They discussed it. Some at least thought they were taking a lead from the Prime Minister himself. And what followed is laid out in gruesome detail in the Sue Gray report. The wine stains on the walls, the vomit, the boozy rudeness to staff. Frankly, what he'd told us before is nonsense. So how come he's still there? Well, here's the second thing you need to know, his defence. He says he turned up to thank staff who were leaving, he left again, and he had no idea about the parties that were going on in his absence. Here he is in the House of Commons.
I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded.
Surprised and disappointed. Well, that presupposes two things. First, that it's a very well-insulated building. Somehow he couldn't hear and he missed all the partying going on around him. And he was genuinely shocked to read about it when Sue Gray dug it out much later. Well, that's just plausible. Number 10 is indeed a very big and rambling place. But it also suggests a strangely incurious Prime Minister. I mean, when all those stories came out, why didn't he just turn to the people around him and ask what had been going on? At a press conference in Downing Street, after he had left the Commons, I asked him just that.
It's absolutely blatantly obvious from Sue Gray's report that the staff involved knew they were breaking the rules. They talked about going out by back entrances, avoiding the cameras, and so on. You told us, you told the House of Commons, you told the British people again and again that no rules were broken. When those stories started to come out about the parties, did it never occur to you to ask around and find out what had happened?
Yes, of course, and that's when I instituted the inquiry. Who's next?
Who's next? Not me. But as the inquiry was beginning to grind on, he was still telling everyone with confidence as Prime Minister that no rules had been broken. It was nonsense. I say again, why didn't he just ask? This lack of crucial knowledge is very important to the Prime Minister's future, because if you lie to the Commons under our system, you are out. The next thing you need to know, however, is that politics is an animal business. Johnson just wants it more, wants to stay there more than any of his Tory opponents. He's a big, sometimes charismatic, sometimes ferocious beast, the albino gorilla. The rest of them, by comparison, are timid little vegetarian things who constantly run off into the undergrowth when a confrontation seems to be coming. They don't have the glossy lower organs, as it were, to take him on. And today, the big beast had found a new formula, words which sounded as if he'd learned his lessons and was, quite possibly, contrite.
I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the Cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch.
He took full responsibility, by my count, around 12 times during his common statements, and then several times more during the press conference afterwards. But what does taking responsibility mean these days? Is it just a verbal flourish? What follows from it? In the old days, taking personal responsibility was almost a synonym for, I am about to resign. Well, I don't know what it means now. Anyway, this extraordinary day had started with an almost festival atmosphere in the coffee bars around Westminster. The kind of slightly hysterical, brittle cheerfulness I imagine you saw on the cobbled streets in the old days before a public hanging. Now, no one actually thought this time the chief culprit would consent to be hanged. We all knew he'd hand back the rope with a smile and a bold admission of personal responsibility. But we felt something would happen, some kind of reckoning after all this time and hoo-ha. And my friends, we were all wrong. The Labour leader stuck to economics in Prime Minister's questions, which meant it turned into a competition about tax policies, the kind of wham-bam verbal electioneering Boris Johnson excels in. After 40 minutes, I have to tell you, for all the opposition rhetoric, nobody had laid a finger on him. But Keir Starmer, who loathes the idea that politicians are all the same and that he is somehow similar to Boris Johnson, sounded properly stern.
The door of number 10 Downing Street is one of the great symbols of our democracy. Those who live behind it exercise great power, but they do so knowing their stay is temporary. Long after they've gone, that door and the democracy it represents will remain firm and unyielding. But Britain's constitution is fragile. It relies on members of this House and the custodians of number 10 behaving responsibly, honestly, and in the interests of the British people. When our leaders fall short of these standards, this House has to act.
Ouch. Boris Johnson, remember, is supposed to be in full apology form, humble pie and grovel sauce. Sorry, sorry, sorry. But oops, he seemed to forget all of that as he exploded delightedly at the Labour leader.
After months of his, frankly, sanctimonious obsession, Mr. Speaker, the great gaseous zeppelin of his pomposity has been permanently punctured and irretrievably by the revelation that he is himself, he didn't mention this, he is himself under investigation by the police.
Now, as I may have mentioned once or twice before, politics is often more like cage wrestling than sophisticated exchanges of arguments. Quite soon, the Tory benches were making a noise which sounded like Shrek being sick, quite possibly after a leaving party, and which is meant to signify their approval. After about 10 minutes of Johnson's explanation, they started to leave the chamber for lunch. Nothing more to see here. A very few were bold enough to stand up to tell him what they really thought of him. One of them, who'll join me later on, was Tobias Ellwood, chairman of the Defence Select Committee.
This is a damning report about the absence of leadership, focus and discipline in number 10, the one place where you expect to find those attributes in abundance. I made my point and my position very clear to the Prime Minister. He does not have my support. But a question I humbly put to my colleagues is, are you willing, day in and day out, to defend this behaviour publicly? Can we continue to govern without distraction, given the erosion of the trust with the British people? And can we win the general election on this current trajectory?
Good question, Tobias, and he's not alone. Quite a few Tory MPs say today both that Boris Johnson is safe as Prime Minister and that this whole sorry saga will help cost them power in the election whenever it comes, which, when you think about it, is a rather strange proposition. As I said before, the biggest problem for Boris Johnson in the short term is whether he can or cannot be proved to have lied to Parliament. In the first week of June, a committee, the Privileges Committee, will start to look at that. There are Tory MPs in the majority, but having looked at them in some detail, I can tell you tonight they are likely to be pretty tough. After that, some will have there will be some by-elections, and then one day it's over to you, to all of you, in a general election. Now, we're all busy. We've all got quite short attention spans, but still, my friends, don't forget what didn't happen today.